Hello. In our last session, we completed the image upload in our album update form. And in this session, we'll look at the c-GridView in the album admin form and learn how to customize it. The c-GridView widget is an incredibly powerful tool, and in this session, we'll demonstrate some of the ways of using and customizing this widget. The album admin action displays a list of albums, in fact, a list of all albums, and in our application, this should display a list of albums just for the logged-in user. So first, let's take an overview of how this widget works. It's an Ajax-enabled widget, and so will refresh itself based on filter criteria or sort requests. The GridView displays data returned by a method in the data model using a data provider object. By default, this method is the search method, and in the controller, when we create a model instance to pass to the GridView, we use a search scenario. This scenario is primarily used to validate model attributes differently to those in an insert or update scenario. The GridView uses the model to store the search criteria and then build the final query. For example, by setting the model album ID equal to 1 and then running the model search method would result in the cDataProvider object having all records belonging to user ID equals 1. So in our album admin controller, we can see that it creates an album model in a search scenario, and we only want to display records for the current user, so we need to add a filter using the current user ID. We could either add this into the controller just by adding this line model owner ID equals ye@user ID. Alternatively, and better from a reuse point of view, we could add a scope to the model and use this. So let's define a scope, and we'll call it mine. So we've already used scopes, and we'll add the mine with an order of the created date, condition equals owner ID equals, and then a parameter, and we define the parameter, the owner parameter, as the ye@user ID. And then in the search function, we can set the scope of the criteria to mine. So now that should filter the query every time, so let's see. And there we can see the records being displayed belong to the owner ID of 2. Okay, now moving on to the GridView itself, which is used in the View's album admin form. The grid ID is used by the Ajax request and, as with standard HTML, must be unique in the current page. The data provider refers to the model method, which returns the populated cDataProvider object, and in this case, we're using the search method. The filter determines which model instance will be used by the grid to store the filter values. Normally, this would be the same model instance as the data provider. The columns can be a simple list like this, or each column can have a number of parameters, and this is where we'll start changing what is displayed in the grid. We'll remove the ID field, and we're going to change the owner ID to show the user's full name, just to illustrate a relational join. So let's have a look at that. And we'll see that the owner full name is displayed in the list. But actually, we don't need the user ID, so we'll remove that. Shareable should display yes or no, so we'll change that to use a PHP tertiary function. And the created date will use the ye date formatting class, and I'm going to put in a UK date format. So let's go and try that and see what it looks like. And we can see the formatting changes that we've just made. The columns, we no longer have the ID, we've formatted the data column. Now for some homework. If you have a look at the advanced search form and try and understand how this is posted to the same controller action, the album admin controller action. And then try using an application like Fiddler where you can see the response and request information flow. So in conclusion, we've seen how the c-GridView works and how it can quickly be customized to provide a flexible and very powerful widget. We've also seen how we can apply scopes to our data provider queries to use built-in filters. And in our next session, we'll add a c-GridView into our album update form to display the photos for an album.